Good morning, everyone. I want to start on time because people aren't, no, people that are going to attend on Zoom, they're going to start to look for us at 9:30. So it's 9:30, so I want to make sure that we are on time for that. My name is Marcelo Caldas. I'm Assistant Provost for International Faculty Collaboration in Educational Programs, and I'm the chair of the Safety Committee. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tim Peverill. Tim has a BA in History from Ashbury College, Kentucky. He has an MA in Linguistics from University of Iowa with TESOL emphasis. Tim has been working in the ELP since 2014, although he had been instructing before. I think it was
1989.
89, yeah. And after that, he spent 4 years here or 5 years and went to work in other places in other countries. So has a long experience. So I told him that he's going to have around 30 minutes to present the same topic that we asked the other ones. And so how, as I'm one of the 3 leaders within the ELP, would you contribute to advance the academic affairs of the ELP? While building consensus and support a collegiate environment. So,
all right, thank you. All right, my microphone's working? All right, good. I hope people got a chance to look at the resumes and everything. Looking at the resume, it's a little, it could look very impressive sometimes. If I think back to my high school resume, I was 3rd in my class, captain of the high school basketball team, lead in the musicals and the plays for 4 years, things like that. And then I tell people that there's only 23 people in my high school class, and then the resume becomes less impressive. So context is everything. So I hope that you'll get a chance to look at the resume and ask me about things, because it just covers kind of the generalities. It's a 25-year career on 1 page or 1.5 pages. So just to give you the storyline a little bit for my life experience, as Marcellus mentioned, a history major, cross-cultural communication minor, studied French as well. Thought I knew French until I took a trip to France, and then I realized I didn't know French. Went to University of Iowa for linguistics degree. Taught in their ESL program there while I was there as well. From 1989, in 1989, Bill Snyder and I came from University of Iowa. We turned this place around. There were about 9 teachers in the program at that time, and some of them are still around. And after that, I went to Jordan and studied Arabic in an immersive situation. Moved to Oman after a couple years, taught English there in an institute. I was an assistant administrator, head of the English department, did all the curriculum testing and so on for the program. After that, after about 7 years there, I went to Al Ain, UAE, United Arab Emirates, where I was a curriculum director for an Arabic school. So stepping out of the English instruction into Arabic instruction. And so I did teacher training there, curriculum, wrote books on teaching Arabic, taught classes when I needed to, did testing, everything there. Now, and then 2 years ago, I came back to K-State after 20 years away, and I've been here 2 years so far. It's fun to see the way the program has grown, developed, and you can still see some of the seeds and roots of those earlier years. And it's just kind of like a time warp to come back and see some of the things that have changed and some that are completely different. So I hope that you'll ask me questions about my resume and experience at the end. What I'm going to do today is probably a little different than most. This is the question that is put to all of us. How, as one of the 3 leaders within the ELP, would you contribute to advancing the academic affairs of the ELP while building consensus and supporting a collegiate environment? And I chose kind of to focus on several of these phrases So first of all, I'm one of 3 leaders, as this is phrased, and so automatically you're in a team situation, cooperating from within the LP. This position is, I see, is representing the teachers in a lot of ways, much in the same way that Lena's position represents the students, in a sense. Contributing, so just one small part is a team effort. Advancing, going forward where we are, from where we are to where we'd like to go. I see this whole process of contribution and advancing is organic growth. And then consensus and the environment, the collegiate environment, or collegial environment, as some say. And so these themes, I hope you'll see in what I'm doing. It's probably a little different sort of a presentation than what others have done. And so what I'd like to point out is this is not what I'm supposed to talk about. How, as a new leader of the LP, I would contribute to advancing my career in the LP while building my resume and supporting a loyal cadre of coworkers. That is almost totally opposite of what it is. So just to remind us of where we're not going with this. It's not about me, in a sense. But there are some things I've learned along the way, and I've just picked out 7 things. And the first thing I've learned in my years is to ask others. When you don't know, I remember my first interview with the ELP back in 89, 88. I guess the interview would be 89. And one of the questions asked me, how would you teach the subjunctive noun clause? And my answer was, I have no idea. I would probably ask one of the more experienced teachers how to do that, and I'm not even sure what it is. And so apparently that was the right answer, and which I was glad of. So I've learned to ask people when you don't know. And I've learned so much from other teachers here. Just recently, even talking to Virginia, she was telling me about what's expected from English comp students at K-State. Carrie was telling me about how ELP's reputation on campus needs attention. Greta was giving me insights on cognitive psychology. Christina, I've learned a lot with her knowledge of testing. I really didn't know they'd be here. Liz, introducing me a good way to do peer reviews in class and book circles, things like that. I could go on and on just listing what I've learned from different people. But the other part of this, of asking others, is you should ask people when you do know something as well, not just what you don't know. Because I've learned so much from people who see things differently and getting a new perspective. And sometimes you think you know something, and when you talk to others, you find out that maybe your perspective is not 100%. Not the only way. Okay, the second thing I've learned is you are not the best. And to qualify that, you are not the best at everything. You need to find out what other people are good at. And I've always found that everyone is better than me in at least one thing that I care about, usually in many things. The other part of that is you are not the best at anything. There are always people who know more about even things I consider myself an expert in. There's something that happens called the imposter syndrome. Have people heard the imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome often happens with people who come to the higher levels of academics especially, and they've achieved their goals in that, and then they realize, hey, I don't know everything. In fact, you realize more and more how little you know about things, and you feel like an imposter because you're supposed to be the go-to person, the expert. And so this is a normal feeling. It can be handled without becoming protective or defensive. And so I've learned that I'm not the best at everything, or actually at anything, but you can be very good and learn a lot from others. The third thing, language learning is mainly a skill like music or sports. We teach in an academic environment, so the temptation is to frame everything in an academic way about studying, book work, learning rules, things like that. But if you've ever done any language learning on an in-depth basis, you find out that it's not about the book, It's about people. And it's just a good perspective to keep in mind when you're doing things like curriculum that, okay, how are people going to live in this language? How we encourage the students to practice their skills and so on. We teach academic English, but that does not mean we need to approach it like math or engineering or biology. Instead, practice immersion, interaction, engagement in real social situations. When I was doing language coaching in Arabic, I talked to the students sometimes, and I found one question that I asked the students would really penetrate to how well they were doing in learning the language. I would ask them, tell me the names of the local people that you enjoy spending time with. And sometimes they'd found, well, I visit my neighbors sometimes, but they don't even know their name. And so learning a language cannot be abstract and merely academic, even in an academic English program. Another thing I've learned, atmosphere is real, and one person can influence it. I think back to one of my graduate classes, Dr. Dubinsky, Syntax 1, the first syntax class. And not a very exciting class. All the students were confused, they weren't engaged, and so on. And I decided I had read something that I can get the teacher more engaged with the students. And so I sat in the front, put a smile on my face, nodded, interacted, and in my imagination I thought, Dr. Dubinsky is the most exciting person in the world, and I'm so glad to be here, and we're going to see what happens. Well, what happened was he started just talking to me and ignoring the rest of the class, but he got very energized and engaged, and it changed the class. And the other students came and said, first we thought you were just kind of brown-nosing here, but he's changed as a teacher since you started engaging with him. So atmosphere is real. I think of teaching or supervising a class of junior high boys in Nizwa, and different story than graduate school at University of Iowa, getting people engaged. And they were giving this young teacher such trouble, and I called a couple of the guys who I recognize as leaders, and I said, you know, I've invited this girl from Canada to come and teach here. We've assured her parents that Omanis are good people, that it's safe here, that she would be taken care of and that she'd receive hospitality. And now she comes here, and every day after class she's crying because of the attitude of this class. And I said, I need your help. You know, this brings shame on Oman and on your families and so on. And that class changed completely, and mainly because of a few people, and the atmosphere is real. One of the things with teachers, when I was working with teachers, is I'd get the teachers to ask, who do you need to talk to in this class to get them to be on your side? Because there's always some student leader, maybe subtly, that sets the direction and the atmosphere of the class. So I'd ask them, who do you need to talk to in this class to get them to be on your side? And when I say on your side, that doesn't mean to take your side. It's very important to know that people know that you're on their side without taking their side in a disagreement. Another thing I've learned through the years is teamwork is a lot of work, but the other side of that, with poor teamwork, it doesn't work very long. So teamwork's a lot of work, but poor teamwork doesn't work for long. And why is teamwork so hard? It takes time, it takes communication, and it takes humility as well. It can seem easier to do something yourself. We've all heard the adage, if you want something done right, how do we finish that? Do it yourself. But this works against teamwork a lot of times. It seems easier to just do it yourself sometimes. And sometimes we do things ourselves without engaging our team because we want credit, or we want to be seen as valuable, or even indispensable. And then when you start getting motivated by being indispensable, you get territorial. And so teamwork takes a lot of humility as well as time and communication. Another thing I've learned through the years is you can see something hundreds of times and still not understand it. There's a experiment that psychologists have done. They ask people, how many times have you seen a bicycle? And they say, oh, hundreds of times, of course. Okay, draw a bicycle. It's very hard to do, actually. Similar experiment I've seen with a dollar bill. How many times have you seen the dollar bill? Okay, now draw $1 bill. And the lesson we learn from that is that we often need to examine and study things that we're most accustomed to using already. If we can use a bicycle, we can use a dollar, we don't typically examine it very closely. And that's what happens in programs. The program's working, we're using certain mechanisms, we're using certain ways, so we don't examine it as closely as we could. Another thing I've learned, the last one here on this list of 7, is that schools and universities are organic and not mechanical. People have debated whether the university is going to survive into the coming century. And the answer, of course, is yes, it will, but it will look so much different. If you think back to Harvard a couple years ago, 15-year-old kids sitting around studying Greek and Latin, it would be unrecognizable. A modern university would be unrecognizable. So being willing to adapt, but you don't just throw out what's gone before. You hang on to liberal arts, you hang on to things like that. And in regard to personnel and policies, it's, I think a leader, administrator needs to look at these as the analogy or metaphor of planting and nurturing versus designing and building. People need personal attention sometimes. Weeding out extra growth is an analogy you can use instead of putting in fuses that blow when capacity is overloaded. That could be compared to rules and procedures, putting in fuses. And many times our procedures and rules can become reactive. And so we've had an experience. We had a teacher who did things this way. We don't want that to happen again, so let's put in a rule or procedure to prevent that. Well, you're preventing something that's already happened in essence. And so you have to be able to re-look at this and look at it as a plant and a growth and not just a mechanism that you put on more parts and more gears and gizmos in order to regulate the movement. So I hope these kinds of things bring clarity, not so much about my background and experience, but about my approach. I think all the 4 candidates who were picked wouldn't have been picked if they were not considered qualified. So I picked out these things just to give you an idea of my approach to problem solving, my approach to working as a team, contributing to advancing from where we are to where we want to go, building consensus in a collegial environment. In my cover letter of the resume, I also put in some ideas about vision and values. And I'd like to go over those as well. You can read that again, but just in a little more detail. And I do have a few minutes, so I'm not keeping you too long, I hope. It would be regrettable to pick a good person for the wrong job. So the person and their abilities and vision need to fit the expectations associated with the job. And we have a sheet that tells the job description, but that's not the same as expectations. We need to find out, are people expecting a lot of change? Are people wanting a little bit of change? Is it more about style of leadership and procedure, or is it more about expertise in specific areas? So expectations need to be looked at, both with the administration who supervise the directors and with other people who work in the LP. How much continuity, what kind of process will produce the change? Can you trust your leadership team? Will instructors be engaged and listened to? As teachers, we ask questions like, does anybody really care what kind of job I'm doing? Will I be supported by people who can help me to improve? And these are the kinds of questions I'm asking. So in the spirit of that, I offer a statement of visions and value, my vision and values. knowing full well that as I do this, some people will find the following remarks unappealing. And some will walk out of this room thinking, well, that's not really what the program needs at this point. And if that's the consensus of opinions, I will be glad and relieved that I offered these thoughts, knowing that I'm less likely to be put into a position that doesn't match my talents and skills or expectation. And that would be an outcome that nobody wants, least of all me. So in order to determine if someone is a good fit for a position, I believe it's crucial to understand the approach of the person, especially about coordination, oversight, assistance, cooperation, mentoring, support, and assessment. These words were all out of the job description. Coordination, oversight, assistance, cooperation, mentoring, support, and assessment. And you can look at these words and roles through an organizational lens, having to do with time management, scheduling, conducting good meetings, having organized reports. But actually, all of these roles have a strong relational aspect. I believe the relational aspect of administration is even more basic than the organizational. For example, planning and follow-through need organizational skills, but they also involve getting the best ideas from your personnel and getting the best people onto a job and helping them bring the plan to an end. Relationships take work to build and maintain, and strong relationships facilitate teamwork. So with this relational aspect in the forefront, I want to focus on 3 issues: communication, service, and teamwork. First of all, communication. Okay. Communication is more than words and information. The goal of communication is not merely to give people all the facts, but to come, oh, okay. So I'm not quite done, but I just wanted to make sure it was working.
I thought it was another slide.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's more than words and information. Communication is not about getting people the right information. The goal of communication is to come to mutual understanding so that groups can work together toward a common goal. A lot of times we substitute emails for communication, or we substitute a report for information. So we need more than words. And also, culture communicates as well. A culture is communicated by words, actions, and attitudes. Culture is communicated by things that are not discussed, what is not done, and what is not embraced as well. And these neglected areas can become vacuums of communication, and good leaders will seek out these areas of communication vacuums and voids and understanding, and through planning, work to fill those gaps, those vacuums. Without strategic planning and communication, it becomes haphazard, piecemeal, and reactive. And that's very easy to happen where your communication is reacting to misunderstandings instead of working to make sure that people understand from the beginning, or involved and engaged as well. In addition, communication is built on interpersonal trust. If there's not mutual trust, people will communicate only the minimum of what they think the other side wishes to hear so that you don't get in trouble. It's the emotionally safe path, but leaders need to build bridges of trust. This means showing confidence in other people and earning the confidence of others. So communication is the first aspect. Second is service. Service is more than working long and hard. Service is sacrificing something you have, for example, time, experience, knowledge, even credit for doing something, sacrificing that for the benefit of others. But mere hard work is often a response to one's internal needs. Working harder is often our response when we don't know what else to do. And people can't find fault in you as long as you're working hard, right? So it's often defensive. But hard work is most valuable when we work hard for others. An analogy that helps might be the difference between a man who works hard caring for his own lawn, jealously protecting it from neighborhood kids, and the difference between that and a community that builds a neighborhood park together that can be enjoyed by all. Both of them involve hard work, but service makes all the difference. In the same way, service needs to be in response to the needs of others. So effective service is intimately tied to communication. We find out and negotiate what other people need before we offer our services, so that it takes on meaning for the community. Our work takes on meaning for the community. It's not just for ourselves. So service without communication can be like the person who prepares a meal and says, I slaved over growing this kale and then making this kale casserole and no one wants to eat it. Okay. So you can see some communication was missed out there. The third aspect is teamwork. Oh, maybe you love kale. If you do, sorry. The third aspect is teamwork. Teamwork is more than everyone doing their part like a well-oiled machine. Teamwork also involves esprit de corps, a feeling of pride, a feeling of fellowship and common loyalty shared by the members of a particular group. This is built by personal connections, by accomplishing things together, celebrating together, things like that. In this area, leaders can make a real difference. Leaders need to always have an eye on fostering teamwork and personal connections. So any action you take, think, how does this affect our communication? Is this a work of service that is needed? How can we involve teamwork in this as well? It's not just about getting things done, it's the process of how you get things done as well. So that concludes really my remarks. I hope it gives you a better understanding of my philosophy behind leadership and service as well. So finally, just a thank you to those who helped me as an instructor so far in the ELP, to those who have encouraged me to apply for this position, and thank you to all for listening.
Questions?
So I am Agnes Chikan, one of the instructors, and
I would like to say thank you.
yeah, okay. Now I don't have to shout. So I would.
Yeah.
No more, thank you. Okay, because you talked a lot about your philosophy of leadership, we have to. It's amazing that you started with an anecdote that has guided my own life. The start of wisdom is to recognize your own limitations, so thank you. And it is amazing that, yes, I came here with the idea to ask the following question about your resume. So we are on the same page. We go. From the resume, we know, and you mentioned that you were the director of 2 different schools back in Oman. One of them was an English school. The other one was an Arabic language school. So please try to persuade us. And yes, I have taught too much persuasive essay writing. That your experience that you gained overseas in these schools is related to our needs here at K-State. And even if it was, as I understand, or you tell us what kind of schools these were, as I understand, they were not universities. So how can it be transferred here to K-State?
That's a good question. I think it's going to be difficult for me to answer in a few minutes, but I will give it a shot. Okay, one of the things that brings is ability to think outside of the box. Although one of the first school where I was the director of the English program was not an academic program. We used some of the same materials that intensive English programs often use. So the curriculum was not that much different, although it 30% different, probably. When I arrived there was no way to place students. There was no way to test, no comprehensive testing program. And so I designed those basically from the ground up and implemented those. When I went to the Arabic school, I was the curriculum director originally. And again, the materials they were using were not suitable for their needs. They were based on outdated methods, audiolingual sort of things. And so I brought in a variety of methods. My approach to curriculum is generally eclectic. I don't think there's any one right way to learn language. I think people learn in a variety of ways as well. But I think in general, the most persuasive thing I can say in general about my background is that I think it gives me an ability to think outside of the box. So people who have only been in intensive English programs in the US or situations like that tend to approach things in a certain way without asking more basic questions as well. But as I said, a program is an organic thing. You don't just uproot one kind of thing that's been growing in a university setting and try to transplant knowledge from a different area. You have to acknowledge the roots and the success of what has already grown. I hope that's good enough.
Hi, this is Kristen Oberheid from International Admissions. And my question is, what would you perceive to or identify to be one of the biggest challenge or growth areas you would have in adjusting to the new role? Thank you.
I think probably the short programs would be the biggest challenge in a sense. That's, I think, 10% of the job is helping the director with short programs. A challenge because it is a challenge to come up with short programs. And also, I have done a number of short programs and English for special purposes and things like that, and I just know how challenging it can be as well. But there's a history here of doing short programs as well, and we seem to have done pretty well.
Hi, this is Greta Kleimenhaga, an instructor here. And my question is, you talked about language learning being essentially a skill, that it involves skills in order to learn a language. And my question concerns balancing that with content that is interesting and engages the students in the classroom. And our tests are basically skill-based. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on how to integrate content also into our testing or into our curriculum in the classroom.
I think the content needs to be engaging for the students primarily. It can be academic content, but it needs to be engaging. And it cannot just be a list of words that you're supposed to know because they're on the academic vocabulary list. They have to be engaged and feel a need to use those words, fill those vacuums, and they want to express themselves, they want to write about something. Well, how do I write about it if I don't know these words? And so you create a need in the student for the words. But engagement is the main thing, I think, when it comes to getting a student primed to learn. But there was another aspect of your question that I...
Do you see a way to integrate that into testing? Our current tests are very skills-based.
Well, one thing I think a lot of teachers have noticed is that we have a lot of SLOs, student learning outcomes, and I would like to look at whether we have too many at certain levels. What happens is that the teachers spend all their time trying to teach each SLO to get them ready for the test, that often basic communication and process of really building a love for the language is overlooked. So it is about balance, as you mentioned. But as far as how to make tests, there's some work that people have done with portfolios and having a portfolio approach as well that can counteract some of that.
So you, Laura Phillips Z, I'm an instructor in the ELP. You talked about your overall viewpoint about relationships and roles and things like that. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more specifically about how you feel you would move from a peer from the teachers, most of the people that you were working with, into a leadership position, and also moving into the leadership position where you will now be expected to function as a peer with your former bosses?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, it is a balancing act. I think anybody who is in that position needs to have a good idea of service, that you're not necessarily just an authority over teachers, but you're serving the teachers. You're there as a way to help the teachers meet their own goals as well. And as I mentioned about being on people's side, people need to know that you're on their side even when you disagree with them. But I think it starts with face-to-face communication. Sometimes administrators hear something like, oh, some of the teachers think this, and they think, well, I don't want them to think that. I will type off a position statement to show that this is not the way it is, instead of being constantly engaged with each person in your staff. I noticed this, if I can credit Lena's department, which is a smaller group of teachers that she works with. They have a real sense of teamwork and trust that you see as they work with each other, and that's a lot about communication as well.
Hi, this is Christina Kitson from the English language program also. You mentioned something about procedures and rules can become reactive, and we've certainly had a lot of that in the ELP. So can you discuss how you would not do that, or how you would change the system that we currently have?
Sometimes you do need to address issues, but that doesn't need to you need to make your rules so specific that they squeeze everybody into the same things. Some teachers who are more experienced don't necessarily need the same guidelines that a beginning teacher need, for example. So making your guidelines less specific is one way to start, but also just talking through, and as I said, a lot of it is about the culture. People need to learn the culture of a program, and the culture isn't just made manifest in a set of rules and guidelines. Those can be working, and the act of creating those rules and guidelines is also an act of creating culture. So just the act of working through those is really half of the solution. And then what you put on paper, and people often don't even know it's there, is a different thing. But keeping the discussion going about, so if there's an issue, for example, with some teachers give a lot of homework, some teachers don't give enough homework. The typical thing is, well, we expect you to give this much homework or this number of assignments. Well, and then you have to go, well, how demanding is the homework? Is it only a 10-minute thing, or is it an hour homework? Okay, so let's put in a rule about how long the homework should take for each class hour. Well, then you put in that, and then you find out, well, some students can do that homework in a half hour, and for some it takes them 2.5 hours. So every rule you put in is going to come with its own set of problems, and sometimes just general guidelines, and inculcating to all the teachers the culture and expectations is just as effective, if not more effective, than setting out specific rules.
Any more questions?
And Christina, I think part of that too is a lot of teachers can teach all semester and nobody really knows what they're doing in class. And as long as your grade book is in order, and so there could be a feeling like nobody really knows what I'm doing in class. Does anybody care? And can I get away with doing things a little differently? So again, that's a communication gap.
Victoria Gramp. I am coordinating upper level writing in the program. A few students approached me this semester and last semester who were taking writing classes, and they knew that I was the chair. So the question was, they asked me, do you know how many times my teacher was observed this semester? And I said, no, I don't. They said 0. Do you think that, it would be a good idea to send somebody, a peer or, another instructor or a supervisor or maybe a chair or I don't know, to sit in the classroom and observe and see what we're doing in the class? Because sometimes students come to Lena with complaints, and I think the student services, they see only one side of the problem. They see, oh, the student brought the complaint, but we cannot really, see the other side because there was nobody there, and maybe there is a problem, maybe there is no problem. So what do you think about mentoring, and what do you think about teacher observations and peer observations?
Frankly, I think that's one of our big areas of growth that we need to move into. And I think when you talk about peer mentoring, it can be very threatening to some people. So you need to build in those expectations, get the people who are doing it on both the one being mentored and the mentee, need to be on the same page as far as what it's going to cover. But building that trust. And if people think, well, this mentoring relationship is going to be more like spying, then of course people aren't going to want to do it. But if people are saying, this is a process where I can become a better teacher, and I really want to learn from this particular teacher or so on, and give people the element of choice, that's a huge area of potential growth.
Any other question?
Everybody's shy here today. We've been working some on assessment, so could you explain how you see things going forward for all of our assessments, curriculum, and the EPT assessments, and your qualifications to work on assessments?
My qualifications to work on assessments mainly have to do with the classes I took many moons ago, the things I've read so far, but the practical experience of creating assessments of all kinds. And I think matching the goals of of the assessment to the type of assessment is key. So, for example, we've been working on the EPT together, and that EPT is trying to do 2 different things that are very different. One is put people in levels, and the other is to decide whether people should be in the program at all. And so it's trying to do a whole lot in just a few questions. And so we've seen some of the challenges of that and some of the shortcomings. And then I was here when that test was first created. And so some of the same questions could be refined. It was, when it was created, the very lowest levels were not in view. So there was no 1 through 6 level. And so there was anybody who couldn't hack the test basically would go into a 1 through 8 level. So just the range of what's tested needs some work. I think the EPT is necessary. I'm glad we're also going to use the TOEFL as an alternative as well. I think those are positive directions. But did you have a specific sort of, or just want to know my background? Yeah,
Where do you want to go with the future with all of our testing?
I think it's going in a good direction, but I think now people are free to disagree with me. I think we have too many tests when it comes to the coordinated test. Every test you have to prep for, it takes away time in the class, it takes away the attention of the students as well. I think it's also positive that every coordinated test is going to have some weight into whether they pass or not, instead of it all depending on the final test. So I see some positive things in that, and I'd like to continue in that direction. But I do think we have too many coordinated tests. But I would be interested in getting feedback from all the teachers if that's, examine that a little closer.
No more questions?
Lena's going to ask you question. Hi, Tim. This is Lena Chakrabarty. And some of you might not know, but when Tim was teaching way back when, I was still training for my master's with an emphasis in ESL, and his class was one of the classes that I visited. So, this is a circle that is, sort of completed. But as you mentioned at the beginning, you said that my presentation is very different from the others. And I think you just knew by the way you were going to present that it's different. So why is it that you focused solely on the qualifications of being a leader, qualifications, or the, not really qualifications, but rather the qualities of being a leader, rather than focusing on that job description that gives out who knows how many details of all the different things, if you were selected for that position, you would have to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think before I went overseas, I would have seen myself very much as an individualist, in the sense that I have certain personal goals, I have certain things I want to build my resume and accomplish these things. And I become much more of a group thinker, I would say, by living in a group thinking environment as well. I still believe in individual rights and things like that, of course. But just the transformation of work, growing, and as a teacher, as an administrator, having experience, problem solving a lot. I could tell you stories about problems I had to solve between teachers. One teacher thought somebody else stole money from her and things like that. You talk about a breakdown of trust, what do you do in something like that? So just a long experience of problem solving as well.
So Greta here again, and Lena did not ask the question that I thought she was going to, which is, obviously, if you get this position, you would be working with Mary and Lena. And how do you see your role in the three, and how would you deal with possible disagreements and that sort of thing?
Disagreements do not frighten me or intimidate me. I like disagreements. I'm very suspicious when you get together and talk to people and everybody seems to be agreeing. All right, now I know you're in trouble when everybody seems to be agreeing. So I think that's the first thing. I think having the integrity to guard people's reputations is important. And so working in the leadership team, you need to do that. And that's part of people knowing that you're on their side without having to take their side. So I already have good relationships with Mary and Lena. With Mary, many years ago, can you believe it? Mary and I went camping. Not just Mary and I, but I mean, can you imagine? There was a whole group of us. But if you can imagine Mary camping outside of her comfort zone, she sat there by the fire with her little knitting needles. What was that sound? What was that? But just getting to know people in different ways helps as well. You understand people's story. And you don't just see people as isolated, well, this is a worker, this is a cog in the machine, in order to make them work better. Understanding people as people and part of their whole story is a big part of that as well.
Any other question? No? So I would like to thank everybody. I would like to thank Tim, for his application. And I would like to make a special thanks to the search committee. It was tough to put this schedule together, and I also put it. I know how difficult it is to have 3-4 candidates in 2 days. you know, it's very difficult to go and prepare everything. So thank you guys for helping me to put this search together. Thanks.